Hello, this is Dave Mandell, the host. I wanted to jump on before we started here with season 5 and the first episode. I've chosen to do this as a two-part for two reasons. One is it's an extremely important topic. We're going to talk about with Dr. Jay Foley how he was disabled and had to change his career instantly. And you'll hear about his accident and what happened. And then physician disability is something we help clients with at OJM. We have for decades, especially my partner Jason, and we haven't yet addressed it in 4 seasons of the podcast. So I wanted to start with this. I think it's that important. We have had other physicians become disabled. So that's the first reason. The second, I cut it into 2 parts so that a little shorter episodes than we're normally we're 30, 35 minutes or so. These are only going to be 25 minutes. So we'll start you on season 5. Pretty quickly. So I hope you enjoy this first piece. Of course, we get into Jay's background and up into the disability, up into the accident. He talks about it. And then episode 2, we're going to talk about all the different ways he dealt with it and has since thrived. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, hosted by David Mandell, an attorney, author, and OJM Group partner. We share real-world financial lessons from physicians and insights from experts to impact your bottom line. Check the show notes to get a free copy of our newest book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Now, over to David.
Hello, this is David Mandell, host of the podcast. Thanks for being with us. We have a really interesting guest today that I think we're going to not only learn some things in general, but one specific issue that we haven't had anybody on in the first 4+ seasons to talk about, especially with real life physician experience, which is about disability and how you deal with that and what decisions you can make to keep your career going, and not only going, but thriving. And so I think it's a risk that we all have, including myself. It can happen to any of us. And so we're going to highlight that as well as some other items. So let me tell you about Dr. John Foley, who goes by Jay, so I'll be calling him Jay. He is a super smart guy that went to the right college. He's a Harvard graduate like me, a little bit older, but both of us out of there. And then he spent time medical school at the University of Cincinnati, where those of you who know OJM, we have our main office out there. I was just there last week. He is board certified in orthopedic surgery. He has a subspecialty in orthopedic sports medicine. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery. Did residency at Mass General and was an associate clinical professor at the University of Nevada, Reno. We're going to hear about the fact that he is a California qualified medical examiner, and we're going to talk a bit about that, as well as some other things he's been doing. So with that, Jay, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, David.
Excellent. I'm really happy to have you. So let's start in as we do with whenever I talk to physician, which is, where'd you grow up and what got you interested in becoming a doc and specifically into orthopedics?
Sure. I grew up, North Shore of Boston, kind of where 128 and Route 1 meet, a little town called Danvers. It's grown a lot since then. It's right next to Salem. Essentially, we have our own witch history. But it was a small town where I grew up. There was a private Catholic high school called St. John's Prep. So I was public school until I went to a private Catholic high school, very much focused on college. And so that's kind of where the Harvard education came in. I did well there and played football in high school and college. And so it was kind of directed that way. I think kind of getting involved in medicine back then, I mean, this was growing up in the 60s and early 70s, the parental influence on going to med school or becoming a doctor was huge. I mean, I think, like half the class entering Harvard came in as pre-med, and they're all just weeded out here and there. And, for the most part, it was just kind of the direction that I started. But it was really kind of ortho that, really interested me overall. I was very fortunate to get into ortho. But, as a kid, I had a lot of, little minor sports injuries where we're always seeing the local ortho guy either in the ER or in his office. And, great guy, great mentor, lots of energy. But, the most important thing, David, was this guy was kinetic, engaging, friendly, helpful, and he walked around with a dictaphone.
Yeah.
So he never wrote anything. And I'm kind of thinking in my career, oh my God, English was my bad subject. If I never have to write a thing in my life, and I can just talk into this machine, that's what I wanted to do. So that was kind of the push forward. It seems very petty, but it's really kind of makes a difference when you're thinking about careers.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple of things. First of all, St. John's Prep, I didn't know that. Some good friends who went there. There's a bunch of good athletes, like pro athletes, who are, for those of you watching, listening, look up St. John's Prep. In fact, I think things don't change that much. You and I aren't that much different in age, but there are a bunch of folks on the football team from St. John's, and probably maybe the hockey team too. But so that's one thing. And then it's funny you mentioned the dictaphone and like what little things direct you somewhere. I can remember very distinctly in ninth grade science dissecting a worm or something, and I was like, I am not going into medicine like my dad, like my grandfather. Now my brother did, but I knew like right then, like this. That's not I did poorly in science. I mean, chemistry was definitely, I think, my hardest subject in high school. But I was the opposite. Like writing, yeah, I could do that all day long. So, but my father did. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. My first job, high school, was because my father's a radiologist. Was every day after school practice and whatever, going to a chiropractic office and picking up X-rays and driving them home, and then my father would dictate the diagnosis or whatever, the notes and everything. And then that morning I would take the cassette tape along with the x-rays back to the chiropractic office before it opened. That was my job. That's got my first car. So some dictaphone memories in my youth as well. So as you're going through the training, medical school, fellowship, all that training. What was because this is a finance podcast, obviously, was your exposure, interest in finance? Were you someone who like read the Wall Street Journal every day at one extreme, or someone who never thought about it and just figured, I'll be good in medicine and everything will work out? Where were you on that spectrum?
The latter of those two, by far. We really weren't directed into anything more than, our training and orthopedic education. There was very, very little on the backside of that, just the orthopedic training back then was, I averaged every third night in the house on call, essentially through my residency. And, you have very little time for that little slice of your own life. So we really didn't concentrate much on finances, or we got by on the less than $20,000 they paid us a year.
Right.
So kind of slave labor stuff.
I get that. And I've heard that before. So one thing, just to preview here, in that period, as you're coming out, like before you even take your first job or in that period, disability insurance. This was something that you were made aware of, that it was, presented to you. Tell us just a little bit about that, because obviously it's going to come back later as we talk.
Yeah, I don't recall exactly how it happened, but it was in my, probably fourth year, just as I was getting more kind of senior in the program. And I remember it was exactly around the time of my first cell phone, before the flip phone, actually, some big clunky Motorola thing. And I have no idea how it happened, but there was a rep that, was engaging many of us orthopedic residents. And I personally know him. He was the brother of a woman I went to college with and had the last name of Foley. So we got along very well, and we've spoken, through the years on and off. He's moved on to do other things. uh, but he educated kind of us on what the need would be, what the cost would be, and how the policies were personal, meaning if you couldn't do surgery, you were disabled. So they were very specific in the policy directions, and that's I learned back then that's kind of the policies that you really want, that give you the flexibility for to still work in the office, which is eventually what I did after I got hurt, but also collect your disability.
Right. And that's called, own occupation, as opposed to other, again, I'm not the disability expert in our firm like Jason and Michael. And those of you watching or listening, we'll talk about our new book, but there's chapters on that, and we get, pretty in depth, and we've got videos and all sorts of stuff on that from other teammates. So let's fast forward to kind of the first phase of your career before you got injured. Just tell us about like what your practice was like, where you were, what kind of patients you were seeing, give us kind of a picture of your practice.
Sure. I knew that I wanted to be in a ski town. I enjoyed skiing. I looked for ski towns for my fellowship. But finding a ski town in the West, not East, I knew I didn't want to be back East. I'd skied enough back East to know it's a little icy for my liking, and that there was better snow elsewhere. Anyways, I was pretty selfish, I think, but in retrospect, but it worked out that I got a temporary position in the winters in Truckee, which is a ski town of North Lake Tahoe. It's where the hospital is there. And so Squaw Valley, Alpine Meadows, all these kind of skiers filter into your little hospital. And I'd work in the summer on Cape Cod. I'd work at Cape Cod Hospital, and then travel spring and fall for a couple of years. I lived a very good life. I'd work, make money, and travel. But I knew I needed to settle down. The American board requires certain requirements, and I made sure I met them all and started full-time practice in 1996. I started out as an independent contractor, but in the first year I became a C corporation. All the other doctors were individual corporations sharing overhead. And so one doctor had all the employees, and we all kind of shared overhead in the office building and the expenses. My practice was slow at first. I took a lot of call. That's kind of what they wanted me there to live in the mountains. I stepped up to call, and I really enjoyed ski trauma. I was well trained in it. I felt I brought kind of an updated treatment plan to the mountains for orthopedic trauma. I gradually built a sports medicine practice. I chose to travel one day a week to a satellite to get patients because the other doctors were so ingrained in the community, it was hard to break in. And that satellite office would give me a lot of older patients for joint replacement. It was in a more retirement community rather than a sports community. So I did a whole lot of sports, a whole lot of joint replacements, a whole lot of ski trauma. But also, we live on the border of Nevada, and there's a lot of patients that can't cross that border that need care, basically state aid. And so we'd see anything that came in the door. I saw back pain throughout my entire career of my own patients. I would do feet if it required. I would do hands. You do what's required of you. You're in a small community, and some of the older doctors really coned their practices down, but these people needed to be treated. So, once I got there, I started taking more on my shoulders. And then, so basically a full service orthopedic surgeon is where it was, with a call and, joints and, and what's frustrating is all those ski days I got early in my career seem to kind of get less and less as the years go by.
That's right. You got busier. Two things. One thing to point out from there, I know, is that if those who have, I like to refer back to other episodes and just make points that come up often. And you had mentioned, hey, I got out there and I basically said, yes, I'd take call. I would do what was needed to build a practice. And we had Dr. Aston, who speaks on branding and to young docs about how to build their practice. He's at HSS in New York, Hospital Special Surgery. And we had him on season 1 or 2, and he talked about that, that you start, that's the way you start. You start doing what the other docs need you to do, and you say yes, and then eventually you get, more and more, you get a reputation to be that person. And then Dr. Madan Kandula was on last season. He's ENT doc out in the Midwest and built a very significant practice now with, I think, like 10, 12 offices and private equity investment. But he said he started out, doing the most mundane things and to just get referrals from the existing docs in the community. He said I had to do what, they didn't want to do initially. Wasn't my dream to do that. I wanted to do more, but that's where I started, and then I got to build. So those of you listening or watching were younger and sort of career, what Jay just said has been echoed by other experienced docs. So you mentioned you took everything on your shoulders. So that's my segue. Let's talk about your shoulder and what changed for you in a big way on your birthday one day. So tell us about that.
Unfortunately, so I take my birthday off, pretty much every year and ski. It's in January. And I was a later dad. So I was out there with my 8-year-old and just kind of going down the mountain. I pulled him out of school or something. And first run of the day, I made the cardinal mistake. You just looked back at him. When you're snowboarding, you always want to look forward. And I was a good snowboarder. I just back edged, and I had that little bit of momentum and somewhat flew. My left side's forward, flew backwards and landed on my shoulder. I knew exactly what I did. And I checked, it wasn't fractured. I could move it around. I just couldn't lift it or rotate it, and I knew I had this multi-tendon rotator cuff tear. Left side, non-dominant, kind of, that's okay. I could live with that. But I kind of knew everything had changed right then. I knew what I did, what I needed to have done, what had to change. And, we as ortho are so calculating in terms of we know exactly what the problem needs and how long it takes to recover. I knew a multi-tendon rotator cuff tear in a 58-year-old surgeon was going to be a while until, if ever, I could get back into doing that. So everything kind of changed in one day. So
yeah, and I mean, we have, I don't know, well over 1,000 docs. Like, we can't say the exact number of docs we've worked with in some capacity, and we've had some become disabled. And one of the reasons I wanted you on is for people to hear that, because many of us who are successful, and I think docs especially, have a reputation of, not thinking about their own health. And that comes up in a lot of ways, or thinking they're invincible and what have you, and if you're successful in what you do in your career, that gets reinforced a bit. But we all are one accident or diagnosis away from things changing, in a big way. And that's life. And if it hasn't happened to us, we know friends who that's happened to. So obviously, irony of having it happen to an orthopedic surgeon who takes care of people skiing and snowboarding, like, you knew exactly what it was. And we talked about this a little bit. And I think it's good to the audience to know that you knew what you knew you were going to make it worse, I guess. So you just went back up and did a couple more runs with your son. It was your birthday. I figure you deserved that. That was kind of funny. But so how did you cope with that? First, emotionally, okay, everything's changed. You get off the run, like, back to practice. You have patients waiting for surgery, right? And how did you first deal with it, like, it sort of emotionally, mentally, and then what did you start to do career and business wise going forward?
Yeah. So, there's a lot when you're a busy orthopedic surgeon in your late 50s, there's just a lot of moving parts going on. And those moving parts all came to a screeching halt, and you had to clarify to everyone why one, two, get coverage, and three, there were 50 patients on the operative schedule that needed to find other surgeons, and
Right.
so there was a lot of work to do, along with diagnosing myself. So the first thing I did was, I went out and got an MRI. I didn't even wait for anyone. I basically just self-paid, just to confirm what I had. The good thing about when an orthopedist gets hurt, he gets to choose who their surgeon is. So I got to choose who my surgeon was. And, I knew that I needed to be in surgery within 3 weeks would be probably within 3 weeks with me outside course of maybe some fibrotic scarring of the cuff or difficulty pulling it back or whatever. So, I was in surgery in 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And so during that time, there was a lot going on to assess my emotional health. But, you asked, my emotional health was really good. I knew I had a disability policy. I was 58, and I had made, I had a good career, even though careers start late in orthopedics. For the most part, we don't earn money early. And I kind of knew that the roller coaster or the treadmill of medicine was getting out of control in the late teens. 2015 to 2020, things were rapidly changing in the state of California. My practice, our hospital, and basically, I knew this was going to get me off that type of treadmill, and I had to figure something else out. So financially, I felt I was okay. My disability policy, I felt I was okay. I was in a good state. I just knew that, I had young kids. What am I going to do until they graduate from high school? I wanted to figure other things out, and needed to do it without doing surgery, in order to keep that disability policy going. But it did take, 2 years at minimum to get my shoulder, so it would lift and move appropriately. So it took some time. And in the interim, I was thinking about doing other things. So we can talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll get into that. I just want to pause for a second because it's important. I think, you mentioned you're 58, you had a very successful surgical career that was probably, 20 plus years of earning income at that point, because you start in your mid 30s, after fellowship and all that stuff. For docs who are 38 or 48, it might be a much tougher pill to swallow, right? Because they have a lot more in front of them and they haven't saved as much. But it also underscores what we were talking about a little bit before, which is that disability policy. That is, listen, I've been paying on disability policy every October since I got it 25 years ago. And it's one of those things, just like, any other insurance, I hope I never claim on it. I hate paying the premium in that it costs a bunch of money and I'm paying for something I hope I never use. On the other hand, we do it because there is some risk that it may be the most important financial decision we've ever made. Now, I don't know if that would be the case for you because you were already 58 and saved a lot. But if you can imagine yourself at 48 or a surgeon at 48 or even at 38 and they get disabled, well, this is like, absolutely the most important thing they could do. So, when we work with clients, we're not trying to get them overinsured. Nobody wants that, and in fact, the insurance companies put pretty hard limits on what you can get. So, for people making, and they need, hundreds of thousands, 500, 600, or even up to $1 million, it's not easy to get anywhere near what their income would be anyway. But trying to be smart about, penny wise, don't be penny wise and pound foolish, I guess, is what I'm saying. And when it comes to this, especially for you young docs listening and watching, it's not a fun expense to pay, but especially if, you're a surgeon or someone who needs to be, I could do my job basically laying in bed if I had to, I could record this podcast, I can write up because I like writing, write up my books and articles and do all this. I can't go speak at conferences, but I have a lot more ability to do that than my brother who's a cardiologist who needs to be in the office every day and see patients. He can't do it from.
The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Episodes from previous seasons are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other popular platforms. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our newest book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free copy. Be sure to join David every 2 weeks for the newest episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. It's important to note that this content is for informational purposes only and does not represent personalized investment advice, as the information may not be suitable for your personal circumstances. Please contact your investment advisor before implementing any of the strategies discussed.